Welcome to The Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
At a meeting of the World Health Assembly, starting on May 27th, just less than 3 months from now, the World Health Organization will be meeting, and they're meeting to adopt two agreements. One amends the existing international health regulations. The other, a new agreement called the Pandemic Agreement, is ostensibly intended to prevent and guide responses to future pandemics. Now, what happens is that the World Health Organization has been an advisory organization, and what they're attempting to do here is make what their edicts are mandatory. They want to require the U.S. and 195 supposedly sovereign states to basically cede their authority in any health situation or whatever, anything that might even be climate related, to the World Health Organization Director General that would give him the authority to declare unilaterally public health emergencies of international concern. And this is of concern to us because it's a wide open invitation to dictatorship and totalitarianism. I'm going to touch just the tip of the iceberg here because I've got two incredibly interesting people, Reggie Littlejohn and Meryl Nass. Both have long and impressive resumes. Reggie's founder of the, help me out.
Well, Women's Rights Without Frontiers.
Women's Rights Frontiers. You founded so many things.
Right, and I'm the co-founder of the Sovereignty Coalition.
Right.
And I'm also launching a new initiative called the Anti-Globalist Alliance, which I haven't told you about yet.
We're going to find out about that. And Meryl Nass, she's pretty well educated. She started out with a BS from MIT and then went on to be a doctor and has a very, very storied career. She was the one that first discovered how Ebola, correct? Anthrax was part of biological warfare in Africa and has since gone on to do a lot of work, most recently with the COVID and the vaccine crisis that we've been through. So Reggie, Meryl. Reggie, why don't you start with the Sovereignty Coalition, because what we really want to dig into today is the World Health Organization's threat to our sovereignty, not just ours, but every other country in the world.
So, as you mentioned, I am the founder and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, where for many, many years I was confronting forced abortion in China, and I was able to see the way that the Chinese Communist Party exercises its totalitarian authority. And I became very concerned to see that coming to the United States through the World Health Organization and through the COVID response. So Frank Gaffney and I co-founded something called the Sovereignty Coalition because the way that the World Health Organization is proposing new amendments to the international health regulations and the pandemic treaty would significantly damage or destroy our national sovereignty and also our personal medical freedom. So that's why we co-founded the Sovereignty Coalition, and Meryl is a member of the Sovereignty Coalition.
Well, and Meryl founded Door to Freedom.
Yes.
And you've got a fabulous website which explains in great detail what the World Organization is up to, what's at stake, and what we've got to do about it. You want to talk?
Yes. So I found out 2 years ago that the World Health Organization was trying to convert itself into the world dictator on health, and in fact take this odd concept called One Health, which was invented about 20 years ago, and says that you can't actually consider human health in isolation, but you must include the health of animals, plants, and ecosystems in any consideration of human health. And how that sort of crazy concept has been used is to basically allow the director of the World Health Organization to declare emergencies based on climate or biodiversity loss or pollution or anything that impinges on this One Health idea. Because when you add ecosystems, you're talking about everything in the world can be brought into the basket and placed under that person's jurisdiction.
Well, there's even something called the One Health Commission, which I'm sure you guys know about it. And what they say is One Health is an integrated, unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animal, and ecosystems. And so what they're doing, I guess, is they're putting human beings on the same level and playing field as plants, as
And
animals, and the environment. And what that
Exactly.
means, I get, as you're pointing out, let me put it. It means the World Health Organization can be in charge of everything. If they declare a climate emergency, that's a health issue. If there's a gun incident, they can use that as to declare a health emergency. So essentially, anything that happens on the planet, they can declare a health emergency and bring about their remedies.
Yes, as long as these two documents, or one of them, gets passed in May.
Well, let's talk about that. Reggie, you went to Yale Law School. You could probably help us with the documents, and you also are a litigator.
Right.
And so we've got the existing document, which is being amended, and that has a lot of egregious stuff in it. And then we've got the new pandemic agreement.
Okay. So the international health regulations in their current form were passed in 2005. So last year, they floated some amendments, and it was a long process, but right now they've got about 305, 306 different amendments that they are considering, and we have not seen an updated draft of this for over a year. I think it's 13 months at this point. And so all of these amendments are in there, and we don't know which ones they're currently considering or what they're not, but the bottom line is that in these amendments, number one, they have stricken the word non-binding, so that the intent is that these will be legally binding. And they have also said that they want to have the power to mandate what medications a person can have, what medications a person cannot have, what medications a person must have, so that if there's another pandemic, they will be able to say what a doctor can prescribe and not prescribe. So it's like having, Tedros Ghebreyesus, the Director General of the WHO, sitting in your doctor's office with you. They also want the power to mandate vaccines. So vaccine mandates, forced vaccination, mask mandates, quarantines, lockdowns. The WHO is seeking the power to tell our country how we have to handle a pandemic, and also the power to be our personal physician.
So the WHO, let's set the stage here. It's basically an agency related to the United Nations. It's
Right.
A subsidiary, an affiliate,
The medical
whatever. It's a
arm.
United Nations type organization, and its funding. Let's talk about where its funding comes from. Essentially, the United States historically has been the largest donor. But the thing that makes this different is it has individual donors. It can be people or corporations or whatever. And it turns out the second largest donor is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we've all seen Bill Gates trotting all over the world trying to tell us how we ought to be living. Meryl, do you want to take that and
Yes.
tell us about Bill and
Well,
no longer Melinda, but Bill?
So there's a 2-year budget for the UN, and the budget is roughly $4 billion. It was more during the first couple of years of the pandemic. And it collects dues, but dues only account for 15% of its budget. And 85% of the budget comes from voluntary contributions, which may be from nations or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or organizations that Bill Gates has created, such as Gavi and CEPI, or organizations that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funds, and pharmaceutical companies, and the United States voluntarily is giving even more than it gives in dues. And so the who is first, second, and third, fourth, fifth top donor varies from year to year. But the United States is usually number one, and when Trump pulled out, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was number two.
But these are donors with an agenda. I mean, you go on the website and you look at the organizations, and it's hard to tell, but it turns out the pharmaceutical companies, which have got a big stake in mandating vaccines and whatever treatments there are, they're big funders of the WHO.
Yes.
Right. So the point is that there's a massive conflict of interest here. You've got donors who will stand to profit hugely if there's a pandemic and if there is a vaccine in which they are invested to address it. So in an interview at Davos, I think a couple of years ago, somebody asked Bill Gates, what are the finances behind this? And he said, well, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has given about $10 billion, to vaccine research, and we have enjoyed a 20-to-1 return on investment. 20-to-1 return on investment. So they have every reason in the world to jab every arm in the world because they're making a ton of money off of it. They're funding the World Health Organization, and so the World Health Organization is beholden to its donors, and so in what world do we trust them to say whether or not we need a vaccine?
Tell us about Tedros, our president. Where did he come from? Who is he, and who's behind him?
Yeah. So Tedros is an Ethiopian from the Tigray Party, the National Liberation Front.
He's a Marxist.
Which is a Marxist party. They controlled Ethiopia for over 30 years. They're no longer in power. They've made war on some of the other tribes. His group is considered a terrorist organization by the State Department of the U.S. And he personally is said to have been responsible for covering up 3 cholera epidemics in Ethiopia and preventing aid from getting to these other tribes. He is sponsored by Bill Gates and the Chinese Communist Party. The British government did not want him to be the head of the WHO, but there is horse trading going on. It seemed like he was good for the United States at the time, and there is no sort of open process. There's an opaque process where the Director General is chosen, and he's now in his 2nd term.
How long is his term?
Each term is 5 years, so he's been there 6 years.
So he's got 4 more left than this, but we don't know how he got re-upped in the first. It's all behind the scenes, and I think it's one of the points we need to make is that the WHO has been doing this in deep, deep secret to try to get these amendments changed. This is not something they want any publicity about, and the Biden administration has been working with them to get these changes in place. And it's part. What group is that? Is that Health and Human Services that manages our relationship?
Yeah, and the State Department is involved as well.
And essentially,
USAID.
we've got our State Department pushing a document which cedes United States sovereignty to this international organization. And they're doing it in secret.
And lying to the Congress about it in a hearing in December.
How did they do that? What's the story?
It was the Wenstrup COVID Response Committee, and
Yeah.
they brought in 3 government officials from HHS, from state, and USAID. And Lois Pace is the primary person who works as the head of global health at HHS. And I guess she is our chief negotiator. And so the 3 of them were asked, is sovereignty being ceded? They all said absolutely not. They misrepresented what these documents were about. And really, surprisingly, only Marjorie Taylor Greene really put their feet to the fire.
And that's stunning. But you give me a lawyerly reading of this. What does it mean when you replace the word may with shall?
Oh.
And you do it over 100 times.
Right. It means that it's required, and we don't even have to have a lawyerly interpretation because the World Health Organization itself came out with a document saying that they consider these things to be legally binding. So just one thing I wanted to say, because we never got into the pandemic treaty. The pandemic treaty works together with...
We're going to.
Oh, okay.
Right now.
All right. Okay. The pandemic treaty works with the international health regulations. It incorporates the international health regulations by reference 4 times. And in both documents, they have sections on surveillance and censorship. So in the pandemic treaty in particular, they say that it would obligate nations to surveil on the basis of one health, okay, human health, animal health, plant health, and the environment. And in other words, every aspect of human life on Earth is going to be surveilled
And they require all the countries that are party to this agreement to do the surveilling.
Exactly. And then there's censorship.
Yeah.
Right. So the censorship piece of it is really, really important. They are requiring nations to manage infodemics. What's an infodemic? An infodemic is simply too much information. It could be true information, but if it will reduce the trust in the government, then it's considered to be a threat, and so then they want you to manage it.
Well, is that like CISA's malinformation? They've got misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. Malinformation's something that's true, but it doesn't
Right,
go
we
along
don't
with the
like it.
narrative.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's like an inconvenient truth, okay?
Right, yeah.
Right. So in other words, you could be saying something that's absolutely true, like, for example, there is human-to-human transmission, which the Chinese Communist Party was lying about in the beginning of COVID, and which the World Health Organization parroted and put all over the world. If you said, no, there is human-to-human transmission, back in the beginning, that would have been that would have been malinformation or an infodemic, because even though it's true, it's something that reduces people's trust in the WHO narrative. And nations will also be required to combat, which is a military term, combat misinformation and disinformation through social listening, meaning they're going to be, at least watching over our social media accounts and possibly listening to our phone calls. I don't know what social listening is.
Well, they probably already are.
They
doing
probably
that.
already are.
Yeah.
But so this surveillance and censorship is going to be carried out through digital IDs, which is a whole nother kettle of fish.
This is Bill Walton. I'm here with Meryl Nass and Reggie Littlejohn, and we're talking about the World Health Organization's scheme essentially to control not only our health care, but to control virtually every aspect of our life. And if this is the camel under the camel's nose under the tent, we need to stop. We got to stop this before it becomes real. Meryl, you went through an incredible experience with COVID, and you were one of the early. You early on identified that this came from a lab, and you'd also worked. This is based on your previous experience
Yes.
with anthrax. Can you talk about that?
Well, yes. So I've been a student and writer about biological warfare for 35 years. So it was apparent to me that the most likely source of this SARS-2 epidemic was a lab leak. I don't know how to say. It was just apparent. I mean, these things don't just erupt out of nowhere. You usually have a series. You need to have a series of mutations over a long time before a virus is easily transmissible to people if it came from an animal. And this one just jumped out of nowhere and was highly transmissible in humans and turned out to be adapted to humans better than any other animal. And that doesn't happen in nature. There were other reasons. SARS viruses are designated by the U.S. government as select agents, which are agents that can be used or create pandemics. So it was already in a class that was thought to be where biological warfare agents
Well, you were the
come from.
first person in the world to investigate a pandemic. In this case, it was in Zimbabwe. Before that, it was Rhodesia, using it anthrax in biological warfare.
Right. So, I showed that the world's largest anthrax outbreak in both humans and cattle was, in fact, a biological warfare event. And I published that paper in 1992.
And well, let's talk about the COVID is on everybody's mind now. The World Health Organization that wants to have this total power. Let's talk about their track record during COVID.
Everything pretty much that the WHO recommended was wrong. And when they occasionally made a mistake and put something on their website, for instance, about China's success with hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, they would have to then take it down. They recommended all the wrong non-pharmaceutical interventions like masks and social distancing and locking people into their apartment buildings and all sorts of things that just don't work, but are, destroy the economy, destroy education, destroy people's businesses. And even though the Chinese studied hydroxychloroquine in 20 different clinical trials very early on, because they had already it had been established and by Americans and Europeans that it worked very well for SARS-1. After the SARS-1 epidemic, they did not really, they shared that information in the very beginning in February, March of 2020, but then they too shut that information down like the rest of the developed world.
What was the relationship between the WHO and the CDC during this? Were they joined
Very
at the
tight,
hip?
yes. They agreed with almost everything. I think the CDC tended to control the WHO's, say, okay, change that, and then the WHO would flip.
So with respect to China's role in this, the WHO adopted basically the China model of lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, quarantines. And in China, the quarantines were so severe that they were actually soldering people into their apartment buildings.
What?
Yeah. I mean,
Soldering?
Yeah.
They were
Locking them in.
Locking them in, but soldering. Okay. And I don't know if you've ever seen the clip. It might be useful to splice it in. But there's a clip on the internet of people in Shanghai who have been locked into their high-rises, who were told that they would be able to get food. They had no access to food, and they're just standing on their balconies and just shrieking into the night. So there's all these high-rises.
I remember
around,
that,
and
yeah.
just shrieking into the night. That's the end result of the China model. And they are pushing that out to the world through the World Health Organization. And so the China model depends very strongly on the social credit system and on digital IDs. And so the World Health Organization in the pandemic, in the International Health Regulations, the pandemic agreement, want to track, they're using this now disease X, which is supposed to be 20 times more lethal than COVID, which is actually just a hypothetical disease, as a pretext to roll out these digital IDs. And the World Health Organization is working now with the European Union to roll out digital IDs all over the world. And so they're saying, well, we need these because disease X is coming, and we need to be able to track everyone and see who's sick and see who's been vaccinated, et cetera. But if you go onto the World Economic Forum website and just look up digital ID, you'll come up with a chart about all the different uses of a digital ID. And so these are all the things that you will be required to have a digital ID in order to do. In order to access healthcare, you'll have to have a digital ID. In order to have a bank account, in order to carry on online transactions, in order to travel, in order to vote, in order to pay your taxes.
Now, is that embedded in this document?
No.
Or is that just the implications of the document?
No, this is on the World Economic Forum website.
Oh, well, they're
So
all
there-
in on this, yeah.
So, right, there's all different bits of information in different places. So theory,
Again,
somebody,
your website is,
my website is joytofreedom.org.
and that has all this on the website. You've outlined in detail what this is about.
Well, we have some of it. We've focused on the WHO, but
Okay, anyway, I'm sorry.
But
Keep-
so the European Union had a digital vaccine passport ID/ID. They gave it to the WHO a few months ago when it expired, and the WHO is rolling it out. And we've been told it's going to be digital money as well as digital ID. We've been told by the WHO that there's unfortunately 1 billion people, mostly in Africa, who don't have a proper ID, and therefore they don't have benefits like they can't cross borders, or they can't access pensions, or we don't even know what these so-called benefits are that these people in Africa who don't have a digital ID are suffering from. But, it's this terrible lack of a digital ID that's harming 1 billion people. So we have to roll it out for everyone. And of course, we know that it is the key to the social credit score and to a level of control never before seen.
So I'd like to just elaborate on that. So what this means is that if it's tracking all these different, if you're tracking all these different aspects of your life, and if you have to have this digital ID even to pay your taxes or vote or even have a bank account or carry on online transactions or own a cell phone and and a computer, what it means is if you step out of line, they can shut this down, right? So let's say that you refuse to be vaccinated or you refuse to be boosted. Just like in China, If you are out of line in China, they will just shut off your digital ID, and you will not be able to travel, and you will not be able to carry on online transactions, et cetera, and you will be paralyzed. And if people think that this can't happen in North America, it already did happen with the truckers. When the Trudeau administration shut down the truckers' protest, which was over vaccine mandates, by shutting the truckers off from their credit cards and their bank
Well,
accounts.
didn't Letitia James recommend that for the truckers outside New York who wouldn't deliver into the city, that we ought to shut down their bank accounts, seize their
Well,
bank
she may
accounts?
have. They
That
also
that
had-
friend of liberty, Letitia
Yes.
James, yeah.
They also had their insurance policies canceled. And in some cases, their
They
tires
did or
were
threatened?
slashed. I think they did.
Okay.
Yeah, they did not want them to be able to drive away. They wanted them impounded. Apply maximum harm.
Now, you paid a big personal price for your stance. I mean, you were for, and a lot of my
Yes.
doctor is for ivermectin. I happily took it, but that was forbidden, and you recommended it. And what happened?
Yeah, so, there were many doctors who were prescribing hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and vitamin D and zinc for COVID and steroids and other things for COVID that were not recommended by the government. And there was a massive attempt to scare all the doctors not to get out of line by taking a few of them and making us poster children. So they actually took the chief medical officer of Hawaii and made him a poster child. They went after him. They went after a doctor who was giving hydroxychloroquine to prisoners in, I think, Virginia. I'm not sure which state it was, but members of Congress, including Elizabeth Warren, were saying, how dare he do this? When these are safe drugs, they're over the counter in most of the world. They were over the counter, hydroxychloroquine was over the counter in France until January of 2020, when they made it a prescription drug. These are drugs that have been used to prevent malaria in Africa. I've taken the drugs myself for many decades, like 6 decades. Ivermectin has been around for almost 4 decades, and again is used preventively by hundreds of millions of people in Africa without a prescription. Merck was the inventor. Merck has donated over 1 billion doses to Africans. And then when the pandemic came out, Merck said, well, we don't know if it's safe or not.
Right. Well, the reason for that is that
Well, Merck also set up a research lab just outside Beijing. I think it's a couple $1 billion research lab, R&D lab. So that tells you a lot about Merck.
Yes.
So why would Merck and other companies that know that hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin are safe, why would they suddenly say, even though they've been making it and providing 1 billion doses to Africa, why would they suddenly say, oh, it's not safe, we don't know whether it's safe? In my opinion, it's because the pharmaceutical industry wanted to get the vaccine through in emergency use authorization, okay? And they can't get that authorization if there is another treatment that is effective and available. So how many millions of people died because they never got hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, so to push through this EUA so that the one solution would be the vaccine? And whose idea was that? Could it be some of the people who are benefiting from these vaccines?
The pandemic is over.
Have
It's
you looked
still
at
hard to
Pfizer's
get them.
financials? What's that? You still can't get them.
Still can't get them. Very difficult.
So the World Health Organization is really attempting to codify and make mandatory all the things that were sort of supposedly advisory. Now they want to make sure they get this locked down. Didn't France just pass a law that says if you speak out against the government mandated or recommended, I'll put that in quotes, vaccines in France, that's a felony and you can go to jail?
Yes. Yeah.
Did that real? I feel like I dreamed that. Is that
No,
actually happening?
I think there's one more step, but I'm not sure that
Yeah.
has to go through. But yes, they're on their way to.
Because there's a lot
making
of
that law.
alarmists, and we're all very concerned about the loss of freedom, but there's sometimes these apocryphal stories. I thought that might be one, but that's actually happening.
No, it's happening, and thank God in the United States we have the First Amendment, so we can fight back against that. But if we have an administration that's trying to ram it down our throats, what needs to happen is we need to build the political will to resist, because, and through shows like this, where you are helping us get the word out about what's really going on here. Because if all they do is they listen to the mainstream media,
You're not going to hear this.
they're not going to hear it, and they're going to think that it's reasonable. And it's not reasonable.
So let's circle back to the agreements that are being put in place now. We call them a treaty,
Right. Well,
but they don't want to call it a treaty. Why?
because they don't want it to go through the treaty process. So there's been at least 3, maybe 4 iterations of this proposed, I call it a treaty, but they will call it an agreement, they'll call it an accord, they'll call it a convention, they'll call it a framework, they'll call it anything but a treaty, because they don't want it to have to go through the treaty process.
The treaty process means Senate
Exactly.
approval.
The Senate would have to approve it. If it's not a treaty, then can it just be executed by executive order, which is easy for them right now because Biden's in office.
Well, you know, the Senate doesn't want to take a vote on this. They're deliberately pushing this off. They don't want to take responsibility. You don't hear many, if any, senators saying we want to declare this to be what it is.
So Ron Johnson twice
Well, Ron does.
put a bill
Yeah.
in the Senate, and it was, I think, once an amendment and once a bill, and it was voted down on strict party lines, 49 to 47 is what I was told, that to requiring the pandemic treaty to go through the U.S. Senate. So the senators themselves decided they didn't want to deal with it. It was a hot potato.
What's the name of the person in HHS that's doing this? What's her name?
Lois Pace.
Lois Pace?
Lois.
Lois.
L-O-I-C-E.
Loyce.
L-O-Y-C-E.
So we need to put a face on this.
Yes, we do.
We need to do a Saul Alinsky and make this personal. Well, I mean, you think about it.
Absolutely.
People talk about government this, agency that. There's always people. There's always a person who's making these things happen. And we've got to, she's leading a group of people inside government to, and who's in the State Department? Do we know whether they're,
What's his name? Nkongya Seng, a Ghanaian from Ghana, a man who I guess has U.S. and Ghana citizenship.
Sure, why
and was
not?
head of the African CDC. He's the State Department person and a famous author of Indian extraction who really, I don't know how he found himself in this position. What is his name? I'll think of it. Sorry.
well, we'll figure. This is Bill Walton. I'm here with Meryl Nass and Reggie Littlejohn, and we're talking about how eager the Biden administration is to cede U.S. sovereignty to the World Health Organization and what we ought to do about it. So you guys, you're leading the Sovereignty Coalition along with our good friend Frank Gaffney. What's our line of action here?
Well, we've actually had some really great successes, and so I'll tell you about it, but I would just say everybody should go on to sovereigntycoalition.org, sovereigntycoalition.org, and sign the declaration there. But when we started, which was just about a year ago now, the whole issue of the World Health Organization and the effort to defund it was. There are a couple of bills, but they were languishing in committee. Then we did an action, a campaign to get people to send emails to their legislators, and then within 6 weeks there was a congressional press conference where 18 members of Congress got up and said we need to defund the World Health Organization, and some of them even said it's just basically an arm of the Chinese Communist Party. So that was huge. Then a couple of those members were members of a subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. That subcommittee defunded the World Health Organization, but it needed to pass through the entire Appropriations Committee. So we did another action and got people to send emails and call their legislators. And the morning that that vote was taking place, each member of the House Appropriations Committee had 5,500, that is 5,500 emails in his or her inbox saying defund the WHO, and the Appropriations Committee defunded the WHO. And they actually sent us a video of 2 of the leaders of that in the Congress thanking the Sovereignty Coalition for educating them on this, and which is the basis of their action. So then we did another action, and the House passed a bill where defunding the WHO and requiring any treaty would have to go through the Senate. That passed, but we're still in the appropriations process, and it still has to pass through the Senate. So we still need people's help on this.
Right, that was the Foreign Operations Bill, and it passed the entire House in September. Unfortunately, it's unlikely to pass the Senate, unless we can make a lot of noise in the next few weeks.
Right.
Because it's about to go through the Senate.
And of course, Mitch McConnell is going to be a big champion of this, I'm sure.
Right.
He's a little compromised.
Yes, Chinese wife.
Chinese wife, they call him the first family of China, I think, in the shipping business. And
Yeah. But that was an amazing bill. It defunded UNESCO. It defunded some other UN aid, not all of the UN, but some UN agencies. It totally defunded the WHO. And it defunded the climate czar.
so if this passes, the World Health Assembly, it's now March 2024. This happens in the last week in May 2024. It takes 50% of the 195 countries to redo the,
The amendments to the international health regulations.
but then it takes two-thirds to do the pandemic treaty.
Right.
So if those pass, what's the likelihood of them passing? Without-
Okay, well, two things. Number one, I think that if they do come up for a vote, they probably will pass. I mean, something that the WHO, and people need to realize, the WHO is one country, one vote. So it's not like the United States has any extra votes. Our vote is not worth any more than the smallest country in the world. But my contention is that this vote needs to be delayed because under their own rules, under the international health regulations, I think it's Article 55 says that they have to submit the final form of the amendments or any major agreement 4 months in advance. That date passed on January 27th. And so they are continuing to negotiate these, and they're probably going to ambush the World Health Assembly maybe a week or two before it meets, saying, okay, here it is, this is what we're going to vote on. And they might even continue negotiating on it all the way up, which gives no opportunity for the world and for civil society to comment on it, and that is against their own rules. So my contention is that they need to delay that vote. Now, if they delay the vote until the World Health Assembly in 2025, that will give us more time to educate people
But
about
who's
the
going to
dangers
make
of
them
this.
delay the vote? I mean, how do we?
Other countries, okay, one of the things that I'm going to be concentrating on is trying
Okay.
to get other countries to send something in saying, we believe that this vote needs to be delayed because these amendments were not submitted to us by January 27th. And, yeah.
So I would say that actually the WHO doesn't follow its own procedures as specified in its constitution and in the international health regulations in many ways. And I've collected, about a dozen different ways. For example, many of the proposed amendments to the international health regulations are not suitable as regulations. So the Constitution of the WHO tells you that regulations can only have this limited scope, and that things that are broader than that scope have to be treaties, you see, but they didn't put them in the treaty because it's easier to pass them if they're in the regulations. It's a 50% versus a 2/3 vote. So, and the regulations are already there, so you're only amending them. You're not creating a new document. So, I mean, that's one thing. They don't like to have votes. They're supposed to have a vote of the entire World Health Assembly, the 194 members, and then there's 2 other members of the regulations that aren't part of the WHO. So they all should be voting, but in fact, 2 years ago when they voted on amendments, there was no vote. There was a committee, they had a bogus consensus procedure, and the World Health Assembly never voted. And when 12 members of the European Parliament asked the WHO, where's the evidence that a vote as required took place in 2022, Tedros has not answered them, and it's 3 months later.
So let's dream that Trump wins, and he's president. He's inaugurated in January 2025, and we know he exited the WHO funding before,
Right.
going to do it again. Is this agreement enforceable if we've got a new president?
I think that they would have a very hard, I mean, okay, you're supposed to give a year's notice, and then you're supposed to continue paying dues during that year and blah, blah, blah. If Trump just says, hey, I'm withdrawing, I'm not paying dues, I'm done with you guys, I don't know how they're going to force the United States to do that. The danger is when you have an administration like the one that we have now that actually is driving these amendments. So let's say that they pass in May. So they've got, the Biden administration has between May and November to start implementing them. You can do a lot of damage in that amount of time.
Well, this is just like our border. I mean, it's just, they're just giving up American sovereignty willy-nilly to these
Yes.
to anybody. And so, but we do, this is another reason we'd like to see Mr. Trump president so we can exit this thing.
Absolutely. So that we can exit both documents. There's something called the Vienna Treaty of Treaties that tells you, look, if a country is really unhappy with the way things are going with the treaty, they can make an announcement and get out. Now, Trump was following a procedure that we had actually added in as a reservation to the WHO Constitution when we joined in 1948, which said we have to give a year's notice and we have to pay up our dues in order to get out. So he had started that procedure, and then he was thrown out of office, basically, after 6 months and never was able to get to the 1-year limit. But he probably could have gotten out quicker if he'd used this Treaty of Treaties loophole. If we follow what the documents actually say, we would have 10 months to issue a reservation against these amendments after the Biden administration passed. So if we didn't do the Treaty of Treaties, Trump or anyone else who was president could, until March, get out of the amendments. But once we have signed up to the treaty, it goes into effect for our country in a month. And according to the last draft, the latest draft, which just came out a couple of weeks ago, of the treaty, you've got to be in for a minimum of 2 years or 3 years.
So they're trying to lock us up before the election. They're trying to get
Yes.
this done,
Precisely.
get it done, get it done,
Precisely
get
what
it
they're
done.
doing.
So we've got to wrap up, but I wanted to do something sort of bigger picture. Meryl, you probably know pandemics are actually quite rare.
Yes.
Right.
And even COVID was, you can argue whether that was a true pandemic. I mean, maybe it was. I mean, how would you assess the real risk of COVID?
Well, the WHO has changed the definition of pandemic many times, and you'll find out that in the international health regulations, they're now calling it a public health emergency of international concern,
Yeah.
and not even using the term. Okay, so depending how you define it, I personally believe that yes, this was a new disease. We never saw it before because it was due to a bioengineered virus with many different components that were all designed to make us sick or to get it into cells more easily. So this was a new disease. It did spread across the world because people did not have immunity
Was
to
it
it.
a bioweapon?
I believe it was a bioweapon, yes. So then you have, it was created, I think, to be a bioweapon. Was it released as a bioweapon deliberately, or did it leak out of a lab? That we don't have the answer to.
So what would you have done when this hit the United States? What measures would you have taken if you were in charge of our public health?
Well, first off, the CDC got in the way of us having a test that actually worked. So it took about 3 months to have a test, and that happened because the CDC said you can only use our test, and we're only going to test people if basically we're absolutely sure they already have it, like they've been to China and they have a classic case. So that's what they did in January and February. They tested only a few hundred people in the whole country and let it spread widely. So I believe there was an effort to make it spread. Finally, in March, everyone had had enough, and the CDC was told, you're not in charge of this anymore. The FDA said, okay, we will start approving tests to be run if you give us the paperwork. But the paperwork took a week or two to complete. And so by the middle of March, FDA then said, if you have a test, start using it, send us the paperwork later. We've got to start testing people and figure out who has what. And so, but by that time, it was all over the country. Now, I was aware in February that hydroxychloroquine was probably going to be very effective. I became aware of several papers that showed that. I had read the Chinese scientists had actually told a group of doctors at Johns Hopkins that it worked. They had published about a 50-page brochure about everything they found to be reasonably effective. and made it available to us, translated it into English, and we didn't follow it. So, yeah, I mean, the FLCCC had good guidelines starting from late spring of 2020, and doctors around the country were not allowed to utilize those guidelines. They were told what to do.
But what about the things that were most disruptive for us personally? The masks, the social distancing, the lockdowns. Did we need them?
We didn't need any of them. None of them worked. And in studies done before and subsequently, it's acknowledged that they don't work. Now, it may be that wearing an N95 mask in a hospital when you've been trained how to wear it and you've been fit tested, they probably work. Under that setting, I used them for 40 years in hospitals. But people going out and buying an N95 mask and reusing it and not knowing how to wear it correctly
Yeah,
and
they all
take it
fit-
on and
we're all
off,
fit too loose.
it didn't do anything.
So-
what it does do, wearing the mask does one thing. It stops you from spitting on someone else. If you're coughing and globs of saliva or wet material from your nose comes out, that's what it does. So if you put a simple surgical mask on a person who is producing large droplets, that can be a good thing. That's the only thing it's good for.
But the
splash
CD's
guard.
circling,
Yes,
I
a
said
splash
it's a
guard.
splash guard.
okay. But the World Health Organization in this agreement basically outlines some of the steps they could take, which would include masks, would include lockdowns, would include passport, the vaccine passports, ability to keep people in or out of a country. I mean,
Right.
it's all, the whole totalitarian regime is right there.
They want to be able to mandate it
Yeah.
around the world or to any country that they want, so that they will tell the United States what we must do. They will be able to tell us, you need to have a mask mandate, you need to have a vaccine mandate, you need to have quarantines, you need to have lockdowns. The World Health Organization will be able to tell us what to do.
Yeah, the thing is, people say, well, they can't make you comply. And the answer to that is A, it's the Biden administration where this came from originally, so they have every intention of complying. But B, what isn't specified in the documents in any detail is that they're setting up a compliance committee,
Right.
an implementation committee, a focal point in every country to assess how well the country is obeying, a new secretariat, and a new conference of the parties, all of which are going to make their own rules. So once you sign up to the treaty, you're going to have to then live with what all these different committees do.
Right, it's a blank check. It's just basically, we trust you, do what you want to do. We don't know what rules you're going to create.
And we don't
but
know what it's going to cost.
We don't know what it's going to cost. We don't know anything about it, but just go ahead. Here's a blank check from the United States and the world.
Both of you separately or together, tell us what we ought to do now.
The best thing is to get out of the WHO and just say, this
Period.
is going
Exit.
in the wrong direction. The WHO doesn't do anything for the United States. How have we benefited from that organization, right? It's a conduit. So we give them funds and then they are supposed to help fix developing nations. Well, the developing nations aren't any better off than they were in 1948. So they haven't really done anything for them and they haven't done anything for us. So getting out is the thing. There are other charities that perform all of the charitable functions of the WHO and can do them better.
Right. So that's the global picture. The immediate picture is I would urge people to go to sovereigntycoalition.org and sign our most recent action item, which is designed to help this defunding of the WHO to make it through the Senate. Okay, so that's like an immediate action that people can take.
Fantastic. Reggie Littlejohn, Meryl Nass, thanks for all this. You'll be back. We're going to keep
One more
up
thing.
the fight here because I want full disclosure. I'm a member of the Sovereignty Coalition, so let's.
Yeah, but no, we're rolling out a program right now to get attorney generals and governors and state legislatures on board about this, because based on the 10th Amendment, states actually have sovereignty for health, not the federal government.
So where do we go to find that? Is that on your website?
So it's
Or the
rolling
Sovereignty
out
Coalition
today.
website? Okay, all right.
And it will be on the Door to Freedom website and on the Sovereignty Coalition website. We are asking attorney generals to sign a letter to the president saying our state has no intention of complying with this. You cannot turn over the health care of our citizens to the WHO because you don't have it. We have it,
Right.
and we're keeping it.
Right, so that's lucky for people who live in conservative states where the AG will sign that thing. For those of us living in very progressive states,
Time to move.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people. That's
Time to
something to
move.
consider. That's something to
Yeah.
consider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think both Trump and Bobby Kennedy will get us out of this mess.
Good. I like that. So we're going to help them.
Yes.
And you guys are going to help. I'll be chipping in what I can do. And so anyway, thanks for joining. This has been the Bill Walton Show, and you can find us on all the major podcast platforms and Rumble and YouTube and Substack now, and also on CPAC Live on Monday nights. And if you like this and you want to be involved, send us a note via email onto our website, or you can comment on Substack. Let us know what else you'd like us to cover. And as always, we're going to take it in and then try to make it happen. So thanks for joining. Hope you found this edifying. I know I did.